The Money Show. Personal finance.
Warren Ingram from Galileo Capital. He is a financial advisor and he sits across the table every day from people who've made good investment decisions and people who've made less good investment decisions. And he tries to help those who have made less good financial decisions make their way through the rest of their lives as best they can with the bit that they've got. I'm going to throw a number at you. I'm going to say 5 million rand because that's a lot of retirement capital for most South Africans. So let's assume that somebody comes to see you and says, I've got 5 million rand. And that's my money, and now I want to retire. What are the biggest mistakes? 3 mistakes. What are the biggest 3 mistakes that this individual is likely to make?
Biggest 3. So I think the first one is they start to treat retirement almost. So I'm going to start with. I'm going to give you 4. I have to start.
Okay, that's fine.
And the first one is really treating retirement as almost a new chapter in life. In other words,
Freedom!
Yeah, or the other way. I mean, what am I going to do? And I can't possibly spend money. I'm never going to earn another cent. And so they have these 2 dynamics, one or the other. And instead of thinking, well, this is just another step in the chapter. And so they often lose sight of the fact that they're not, the fact that they're no longer generating an income from their labor doesn't mean that they shouldn't be taking risks, that they shouldn't be enjoying life within balance and all of those things, and that they're going to live for potentially 25 to 35 years, depending on their health, etc. So a lot of the time, it's almost as if they go into this bunker mentality, batten down the hatches, don't spend any money, move into kind of a little shack kind of thing, and that's it. Life's almost over now, and I think that's that's the one classic. So it's a big psychological issue. And then the other one, as you say, is the freedom. So people say, well, you've got to take advantage while your health is still good. And I don't have much time left. And meanwhile, they could have 25 or 35 years, and they go as if there is no next week. And so those to me are the...
I've been working for 45 years. I've never had more than 2 weeks off at a time. I've now got the next 25 years off. I'm going to jowl.
And I'm going to travel, and I'm going to go like there's no tomorrow. Eat at every restaurant I've never been able to eat at, on a Tuesday when everyone else is at work. And
get the pensioners discount twice.
Yeah, party hard on a Sunday night because, I don't have to go to work on Monday, all those things. So I think that it's really a psychology. So I think that's the first one. And then to me... I think the biggest investment mistake I always see is around being too conservative with investments. Yeah. So you always hear the horror stories of people that retire with sufficient capital, and then you chat to them 10 years later after retirement, and suddenly they just don't have enough their money just doesn't buy enough anymore. What they had in the beginning and what they could buy with that money, they've never lost money. But they haven't really grown it sufficiently, and suddenly they just can't afford to keep up with their cost of living, and that's usually because they get to the psychology of I can't afford to lose anything that I've built up now, and that's not a bad psychology, again within balance, but they have to know that their biggest enemy in their lives is going to be inflation. When you're making investment decisions, your target is, how does my capital beat inflation? It's not
the value of your money effectively halves every 7 years.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
sounds about right? Yeah,
it's a safe assumption. I mean, if the buying power of your rand probably gets you what 50 cents would have got you 7 or 8 years ago, and that's the brutal reality. And if you consider that you retire today with 5 million rand of retirement capital, that sounds fantastic. But unless you grow the value of that capital, you're going to sit 7 or 8 years' time with effectively what's worth 2.5 million rand today, and that's not nearly as an attractive a proposition, is it?
No, and then you've got no room to maneuver. But because what happens then is the less real money you have, the less room there is for you to take risks to try and beat inflation, etc. So the irony in life is those who have enough money and have probably a bit of extra money can actually afford to take more risk, and therefore will allow their capital to grow faster. Those that are very fiscally constrained, but like the South African government now, they just can't take the risk. So I think that's a big one for me. Is you've got to take sufficient risk with your money.
And the trouble is, if you finish working and you don't have another day's income in you, and you know that you're not going to have enough money to last you, then people start doing the really silly stuff and they start taking too much risk. They start doing what so many people did 5 or 6 years ago and buying into the share maxes of the world and into schemes that promise you 18, 19, 20% returns, and they turn out not to be sustainable, any of them.
And what's so tragic about that is that it's nearly impossible to convince people once they've bought into those in that first 3 or 6 or 9 months that they've made a big mistake and they must get out, because they do get hooked in, and those schemes are so cleverly crafted that in that first few months you get back what seems like a massive return on your money. So people get lured in, and their psychology is such that this is now the answer to all their dreams. And when there's still time for them to actually get out, they don't. They get caught in.
So when you look at this now, and so one of the biggest risks people make is either going mad or being overly conservative. And the risk of being overly conservative is you're 10 years down the track, your money is potentially halved in value, and there's no you're now no longer 65 and fairly energetic. You're 75 and still good and healthy and strong, but less energetic than you were at 65 and less capable of filling the gap than you were 10 years ago.
So my constructive suggestion there is you cannot retire. If you're retiring now, in the next little while, you can't retire with less than about 40%, and that's an absolute bare minimum of your investments allocated to growth assets. In other words, in some form or another, to the stock market and to the property market. And when I say the property market, yes, it could be the residential property market, but most of the time it'll be the listed property market. Property companies that trade on the stock exchange, please, not another property syndication, because those two assets, shares and listed property together, have got a very long history of giving you inflation protection. Look at what's going on right now in South Africa, and look at all the chaos we have. Look at what the stock market's done since July. It's giving you inflation protection. Yeah. So in a difficult time, it's still the asset that gives you that. So if you're sitting there and you've got 90% of your money in cash because you want to stay and earn the interest, you just need to know what you've done is bought certainty. Yes, your money's not going to go down. You've also bought certainty that in 7 or 8 years' time, you're going to have half of the spending power that you have today.
Okay, then take me to another big mistake.
I think it's a sign of the economic times everywhere in the world, here as well as overseas, and that's supporting adult children. So it's all good and well when you are a parent of youngsters. Clearly, that's your obligation. You need to look after your children, educate them, and then let the birds fly. But if they come back, you need to have a pretty serious conversation with them, and if it's a husband and wife, as a collective as well. Because what happens now is you get sucked into their real issues, and I'm not saying that they're irrelevant issues. I'm sure they're real, but the problem is, again, you've got no time to rebuild your capital. So if you were, spending, you'd plan to spend 20,000 Rand a month maintaining your lifestyle over your lifetime, and suddenly you're spending 40 or 50,000 because you're now supporting your adult children and their new dreams, and they want to go back and study again or restart their career, whatever the deal is. You just need to know that the problem then is that you are compromised, and again, you're the one that doesn't have the benefit of time to do something about it. So to me, it's a very difficult situation. There's no easy answer here, and I know that parents with adult children will be saying, "Look, there's no other way. I don't have any other choice. I have to do this."
Yeah, of course.
But at the same time, you need to sit down with your adult children to say, "This is my financial reality. If we do this, let me show you the sums," and you need to do those sums together to say that's fine. I support you now. If it carries on like this, in 8 years' time, I'm at zero.
I'm dependent on you. And will you return the favor when you are married to somebody who doesn't like us? Yeah. And will you keep the back room open? Because that's the reality for me.
And I think, even getting to the point of writing contracts for exactly that reason. So that if there is an in-law, whether it's the parent-in-law or the daughter-in-law, the son-in-law, doesn't matter, that there is an obligation then, it's a legal obligation as well, so that there isn't the potential for, in 5 years' time, someone saying, "Look, I never said that. I never agreed."
That's the problem. Number 3.
Pick one. I think to me it's got a lot to do with efficient tax planning. So a lot of people, for example, let's just say your 5 million number. You retire, you've got 2.5 million rand sitting in your retirement funds and 2.5 million rand sitting just in normal money, accessible money. And so what happens is a lot of people would identify their retirement fund as the place that they're going to draw their income from, and they're going to leave their other money for last. They're going to just not want to draw that. And it's usually some good reasons. One, because if you need to replace your car one day, you need accessible money. You can't go and get it out of your living annuity, as an example. So you need accessible money as well as your retirement funds. But it's important to know that there's a lot of tax efficiency that you can gain from splitting the way you draw your income from both sets of assets. So just a couple of things. One, money that stays inside a living annuity, as an example, when it's growing, it grows tax-free. There's no income tax, dividends tax, capital gains tax, etc. So as much money as you can leave inside a living annuity, that's obviously priced reasonably already. And if you can leave it there and let it grow, it's compounding unfettered by tax. And I think that's an important thing to note. Yes, when you draw your pension out of there, or your annuity, it is going to draw a tax rate. But that's only on the income that you're drawing. It's not on the whole capital amount that you've got in there. Also, if you are in a good financial position at the time of your passing, that money that you leave to your kids or your beneficiaries is free of estate duty, free of executors' fees, etc. So I'm not convinced that you want to take your living annuity, for example, and just plan to get that to zero. There is a benefit to using other money. And the other money, for example, the 2.5 million that you've got in shares or unit trust or exchange traded funds, if you draw an income from that on a monthly basis, what happens is most likely you're going to pay capital gains tax, because you've got it in a unit trust. Let's just say you put it in a balanced fund, and every month you sell a few units to pay yourself an income to subsidize the money you're drawing out of your pension. That's going to generate you capital gains tax. Capital gains tax, even if you're at the highest tax rate possible, is 18%. Compared to 45% on income tax. So to me, you can be quite clever with the way you use your assets to generate an income, and then get incredible tax efficiency, which means everything lasts more, which means you can spend more over time or leave more behind if you really want to leave it to your kids.
Yeah, which would be nice, I'm sure. They'd be grateful. One last point then before I let you go. What's the other big mistake that retirees make that they can avoid and should avoid?
I think in a time like we've got now, where we've had a couple of months of good growth in the stock market, but before that we had 3.5 years of no growth, and you can't control that. You can't suddenly go and change all your investments to say, let me take double the risk that I used to take, or half the risk because of what's going on in the economic environment at the moment, or the stock market conditions. So if you're in a situation where your capital's just drifted for a couple of years or 3 or 4 years, and you're getting concerned about what's going on with your investments, the trick here is don't go and change the whole mix of your investments because of what's going on in the markets. You can't control the markets. At some point, the markets turn. At some point, if it's just a situation like we've had now, where it's been stagnant, at some point the patience will be rewarded and you'll get growth. Yeah. That's fine. So what can you control? Well, you can control the way you spend your money and what you do. So I know I've been going on about getting a balance, and don't live as if there's, you're going to live for the next 1,000 years or the next year. But at the same time, if you really are concerned because markets haven't given you what you were planning, the one thing you can do is early on in this process then say, okay, let me scale back my expenses by 5 or 10% now. And when the market's correct and I start to get my growth, I can rectify that situation. So that's the one thing that you can control. But I think a lot of people would just ignore the expense side and then just say, I was only in 60% in shares, now I'm going to go to 70 or 80% because I need to make up growth. I've had no growth. And then what happens is, unfortunately, the market crashes. They lose a lot more than they could have afforded to, and the whole situation just gets manifestly worse.
Warren Ingram from Galileo Capital with some dire warnings, but also solutions for you if you're on the verge of retirement. Things to seriously consider. Don't make big money mistakes when you can't rectify those mistakes, when you just don't have the time or the energy or the capacity to fix those mistakes. Big lessons from Warren Ingram at Galileo Capital.